Okay, today I'm going to make a different kind of video. Normally I make technical lessons on how I work in a darkroom or behind a camera, but today I decided to do something very different for me, and I don't normally venture into non-technical stuff because I figure, the way people want to see or crop or whatever film they want to use, it's up to them. I'm not going to tell them how I do things and try to get them to work like me. That's not the point of any of my videos. I just stick with technical things. But I just finished a portfolio, and it was a large portfolio. It was a collection of 48 pictures on growing up Asian. And when I was working on it, let's go back. My great-grandfather came here in 1852, started the business, which eventually my father inherited, was working in that shop, and it was closed in 1957. During that time, because my grandfather and my father are both photographers, there's a lot of pictures and negatives. I remember breaking my grandfather's glass negatives when we were young. When we were little kids, we didn't know what they were. So I have a collection of all this stuff that I inherited when my father passed away in 2012. So going through that, I thought, well, this is pretty interesting stuff. It's family, and my father's brother passed away last year at the age of 99. And he always wanted the family history to be told. And he wanted me to bring him to the Historical Society and share some of these images, and the fact that our business was closed by the federal government during the McCarthy era was kind of a pain in the ass for him. He always wanted to talk about that. Anyway, when I couldn't play guitar because of the pandemic, and plus prior to that I had the shingles, so I couldn't play. And actually, the portfolio I just finished is the third one that I did, but this is one that took a lot of work because, number one, there were 48 images. The other two portfolios I did didn't have not even half as many. Well, the Bob Cameron had 28 images. Bob Cameron in black and white had 28 images, and the homage to photographers of old had like 22 images, I think. But this one I just finished, and when I was working on it, I'd go through these. Like, this is one. This is what I found. Okay, so there's no negative, but it's an interesting picture because it's politics in Chinatown, and so I had to make a copy neg of this because I wanted the portfolio to be silver gelatin print so they would last. I started with this image, which this is my grandfather, and this original is also actually smaller than that, and that was probably 1908 because that's in the store after it was rebuilt after the 1906 earthquake. So that's my grandfather. He's probably about 21, 22 years old there. I started with that, and then I would pick other images and put them up. I'd make copy nags, I'd enlarge them, and every day I would look at them and see if it held up. Also, I would put this one in front of this one and try to make it so that it would make sense, not only chronologically, but in a storytelling way, whether or not the experience of growing up Asian had a common thread going through each picture. It's the first photo essay that I've ever done, actually. I've always worked on singular images, so this was a very interesting experience for me personally. And while doing this, I would take iMovie and put them together and look at it, so that I could sit there and see a slideshow how it worked together. And I actually posted some of that, the work in progress. And somebody saw that and said, well, this is interesting. Could you write an article on how you work? There's a blog in UK that I like to post it on. And I said, well, I normally only write about technical things. But I work, so I wrote something. And after a few days, I submitted it. And it was too long, of course. And so they edited it. And I said, okay, well, whatever, go ahead. And so it's somewhere in some blog on the internet. And they edited it in such a way that it made it sound like I like to do things the hard way. I like to take extra time to get something done. And it's not true. That's not really the point. The manner in which I work involves doing it the best way, whatever that means. And that might mean taking more time. But how I come to that decision of being the best way to do something, it depends on you being honest with yourself. And that was the point of the paper. So they missed that entirely. So I thought, okay, I want to talk about that and address how I work in that regard and share it with you, because this brings up another point which I'll talk about at the end of this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to read what I originally wrote unedited, okay? And hopefully it'll be clear enough, and my voice will be loud enough for you to hear. It's called The Manner in Which I Work, a Guiding Principle. Now that I am in my late 60s, I find that authenticity is even more important to me than when I was younger. And it is also rarer. And why is this? I think it has to do with the time that's left to us, or to me, since I no longer think in terms of having all the time in the world. I try to do things that are meaningful and longer lasting. The advent of the computer age made all things easier and quicker, and in many ways, it brought on an unauthentic time, if ever there was such a thing. I started working in the photo industry in 1967 and started my own color lab in 1987. I went digital in 1995 and began investing more and more into equipment until I had sunk over $1.5 million into our digital department. By the time I closed my lab in 2015, I no longer received films from customers. Everything was sent via downloads and uploads, and the turnaround times for jobs became 1/4 of what it used to be when I started my business. The comment "good enough" began to describe the inkjet prints that replaced photographic C prints. And it was an echo of what was said about digital captures that replaced film images about 12 years earlier. And even though my main business was making 6-foot by 10-foot enlargements for malls and storefronts, which were mainly point-of-purchase images to sell rugs, pillows, coffee makers, and whatnot, I still took pleasure and pride in making good photographs. I looked forward to retirement in 2015 because I had inherited Robert Cameron's Originals films. Bob passed away in 2009 and had thousands of color transparencies. He was a photographer and publisher of the Above series of books, and he flew over New York, San Francisco, Hawaii, Yosemite, Paris, London, and many other cities. My plan was to offer fine photographs and to spend the time left to me making these prints for sale. And this is what I told Bob. I would continue to make his photographic images available to be seen after his death. And I set about to make an inventory of Bob's best images prior to closing my color lab. I also began to figure out how best to make black and white negatives from Bob's original color films. And this was because I would no longer have a color lab. So I decided to set up a black and white lab and to work in that realm once again. In a way, it was back to my beginnings. I did get inquiries from folks wanting to purchase some of Bob's images, but they never wanted to pay the price I was asking. It wasn't nearly as much as Bob used to sell his prints for when he was alive, and which was $100 a square foot. So they certainly didn't want to pay that. Then one day it occurred to me that I no longer wanted to sell photographs. I was tired of it, and I was especially tired of bargain hunters. I was too used to that in my previous business and didn't want to have anything to do with money and photographs any longer. So I decided fairly on not to sell photographs any longer. And then something interesting happened. I no longer cared if an image would sell. I didn't have to be concerned with the opinion of others as to whether any particular image had enough public appeal. I just had to like the image myself. And it had to draw an emotional response from me day after day. If the photograph only looked good for a week's time, then it wasn't worth my attention. And that became my rule. I would look at a work print day after day, and if it did not lose its appeal after many weeks, then I would go to work on it. And in this way, I found a measure of authenticity in doing my darkroom work once again. It would be disingenuous for me to say that all the years spent in making photographs were done without any sense of sincere pride. I had, after all, over 50 employees at one time, and the business supported many families. Quite a few of my fellow workers purchased homes, and it was always a pleasure for me to see their families at the Christmas party. I enjoyed handing out the photos with Santa every year, and the kids always looked forward to the presents under the tree. But as my production manager once told me, we printed and processed over 1.5 miles of Kodak paper every month as we produced photographic posters for 400 to 500 stores throughout the United States. This was in our heyday, and our invoices justified the immense use of time, materials, and man and women power in order to meet the stringent deadlines. But within 4 to 6 weeks, the posters were in landfill, and that's what bothered me. We did this for years on end. Photographs should have more meaning than simply pushing product out the doors of retail outlets. It was at this time that I met Robert Cameron, who needed large color photographs made from his films. He was nearing the end of his life and wanted to show his life's work in the best possible manner. And I began to work on his images personally. We became good friends. It was working with Bob that forced me to focus on the method that I began to use. Before meeting Bob, I had little time to work on images as the deadlines were always short. The photographs had to get to the stores before the matching products arrived there. There was always this deadline, these crazy deadlines we had. Working with Bob's films, I began to study each original from the standpoint of what made them work. I began to sense that a more successful image could be produced by eliminating or diminishing elements that detracted from the feeling of the photograph. I began to notice that my eyes would traverse through the print and settle on the main theme or subject. There were elements that stood in the way and prevented this flow from being smooth. It could simply be a strong color in the corner, or it could be too much color throughout. It's interesting that a color print can have just too much color and be distracting. I notice this every time I walk into a store that sells flat screen TVs. The colors are so jacked up that one doesn't know what to look at. Everything is distraction. I found that sometimes I spent more than a week's time planning out how to approach a certain image. Long ago, I learned film masking. This was in the late 1970s, and I used it to control the contrast of an image. But then I learned how to correct color through film masking as well. And I used what I learned throughout the years in order to best approach Bob's images. This took a lot of time, and often I would redo images if I thought the final photograph could be improved. This was a skill as a darkroom technician that I seldom had enough time for. Prior to meeting Bob, I simply masked color images to the best of my ability, made the print, and shipped it out the door. But I was now able to do things again and again if I wanted to. This is because Bob trusted me, and he was nearly blind by the time I met him at 94 years old. Nevertheless, Bob did notice the improvement in his prints. He even mentioned that his audience noticed the difference. In short, I was able to make final color decisions without having to get a sign-off from Bob or his assistant, and this was new to me as well. Spending more time in making proofs for myself to consider required much effort and time on my part. It's not an easy thing to satisfy oneself if one is honest. But it reminded me of something Maria Rilke wrote in a letter to a young would-be poet. He said, "Just because something is difficult to do is enough reason to do it, because you learn so much from it." I learned fairly early on that photography could be a quick and easy task, and decided to take a lengthier route. I took the difficult path, and indeed, I learned so much. Perhaps difficult is not the right word. I looked for the best way to make a photograph, even if it took longer. I remember getting a Polaroid. The photographer took a picture of a car in a driveway, and then melted the emulsion in a microwave. While the image was developing, the softened emulsion was manipulated with a toothpick, and the image was made to swirl. The ad agency asked me to be careful with the original because they paid $10,000 for it. Now this brings up another point. Many photographers will look for something different and new to do in order to get noticed. This is an easy recipe for disaster if one is interested in making authentic and meaningful photographs. Therefore, what has already been done draws little interest. Many are not interested in Ansel Adams' manner of photographing landscapes. Maybe they think of it as copying a style, or that it's too easy to ride on the back of the famous photographer. But one thing's for sure, it is anything but easy to accomplish what Ansel did. So I look for what is difficult to achieve in a photograph. Usually it has to do with separating the subject from his surroundings. This can best be done by capturing the image when the light is just right. That may mean going back to the site again and again to photograph under ideal conditions. But remember, I honed my skills working on films brought to me. In my case, it meant working with the film I had at hand and using film masking to tame the deficiencies inherent in the original. I was a professional printer for many years and didn't have the option of reshooting. The decisions made by the artist photographer when making the final print are, generally speaking, his or her own. 100 years ago, in the strict photographic art world, a proper photograph was made by contact with the original negative. Enlargements were considered less than ideal, and the image that was produced was only valid if no manipulation was done. Combination printing by combining negatives or double printing from different negatives was frowned upon. There is the example of Ansel Adams having to justify retouching in an area on a mountain that was marked with graffiti. Even removing a twig or an area of weeds prior to making an exposure was considered by some to be impure. When I retouch a final print, I often spot out reflections captured in the original scene. And why do I do that? Because it is a distraction that causes my eye to hit a bump in the road. It is my decision in that regard, and I don't feel the need to explain myself or justify my actions since I'm not interested in selling any prints. I am not trying to gain a following or a reputation. So not selling anything makes printmaking a lot simpler. Of course, it helps that I'm retired now. I just need to live a lifestyle that I can afford to sustain. So no more expensive guitars for me to buy. That's all it means. Making a singular image that really sings because of its dynamic tonal range and the highlighting of its subject due to excellent local contrast is a joyful experience. Many times I have photographed a wonderful image just to be disappointed in the resulting print. This is the tragedy of photography because a beautiful print of a poorly executed shot will not succeed. Nor does a great captured image when the print is made poor. This has happened to me on too many occasions. I purchased a $1,000 Canon digital camera back in 1999. It was state of the art, and it was said to be good enough to make a 4x5-inch photo that rivaled a print from film. I found out though that the dynamic range was too low and shadow detail was non-existent. One of my favorite shots of my son was of him peering under a car for a pigeon that had wandered there. As good as the shot was, I was never able to show detail in the dark areas because there simply was none to begin with. As a remedy, I found that a collection of photographs can succeed where a singular one does not. When working on my folio titled Portraits of Growing Up Asian, I found that the lack of detail in that particular picture did not bother me when it was placed adjacent to other photos depicting a consistent theme. In other words, the picture story holds interest better than that of a singular image. The thread is continued and the eye is allowed to wander through to its conclusion. This was a revelation to me, and a joyful one at that. Imagine, I'm still learning at 69 years old. Now I'll show you that picture. I'll take a break here. And I've never, this is a digital capture. So this is with, and the feeling of, this is my son Cassidy. He's about 1 year old, or maybe a little more than one. There's no detail. It's just black. It always bothered me. So I never really made a print of it. In this case, I took the file, I made an inkjet, and I made a copy neg, a black and white copy neg of the inkjet, and then I was able to go in the darkroom and make this print. So that's a silver gelatin print. Yeah, because it's not a picture to stand on its own. It's it's part of the photo essay anyway. Now, I can still recall the day when sincerity became the measure of life's success or failure for me. I had recently left my first marriage, and my second child was only a few months old. It was a very difficult time, and I was searching for some meaning in my life. Prior to this, I thought I knew it all. It's interesting that the older one gets, the less he knows. At the time, it was recommended to me by a mentor that I attend a Friday night group at the local Vedanta Society. Those Friday night classes were given by a Swami who read ancient books from the Hindu tradition. The reading was followed by an explanation and discussion of the subject. In most cases, the whole meeting covered only 1 or 2 paragraphs from the sacred texts, and it took many weeks to finish a single chapter from the Vedas. After a certain amount of time, the Swami would invite questions from the people who attended the class. The questions were placed in a jar, and the Swami would choose one question to answer. And one night, the Swami picked one particular question and read it out loud. He said, "Swami, if the world is an illusion and everything we see and experience is not real, even the very ground we stand on, then what is the meaning of it all? Why should we bother to do anything with our lives? Why should we even bother to come to Vedanta?" And I will never forget his answer. The Swami said, "Please do not misunderstand us here at Vedanta. We are not wasting our time here. We are not babysitters for you. And yet, it is like how you teach children. When someone gives something or does something for the child, you say to the child, 'What do you say?' And the child answers, 'Thank you.' Then when the child grows into a young adult and someone gives him something, the response automatically comes. He says, 'Thank you.' He no longer needs reminding. After many years, the young adult becomes old. Many of his friends have passed on, and he goes throughout the days alone. Then one day, an old friend comes to visit. He spends the whole day with him. They go out to lunch, and at night they come home and have a nice dinner together. At the end of the evening, when it is time to leave, the old man now says to his friend, 'I am so grateful in my heart. You have done this for me. Thank you.' And he means it. This is why you come to Vedanta. You come to learn, and this is why we are here. We are here to teach you." And I was immediately struck by the story. The idea of meaning what you say to others became ever more important to me. But the original question posed to the Swami was not lost to me. The question was, if life is an illusion, then what is the meaning of it all? Was the Swami alluding to the fact that what we mean with our lives is not an illusion? Could it be that what we sincerely mean with our lives can be a truth, a constant, that it can even determine our next existence? Don't forget that reincarnation is not just a belief in Hinduism, it is a law. So I wrote a letter to the Swami and asked him this very question. Was our true intention in life not an illusion? After all, on our deathbed, when all is said and done, there can be no bullshit. We know what we believe. We know what is important to us. Are we not then obliged to live our lives with the knowledge that what we think and do with our time are all in preparation for that moment before we die? Is not sincerity the most important thing to learn in life? If it is not, as everything else is an illusion. And the Swami did not reply. So that's my paper. That's what I wrote. And I guess I wrote it 3 or 4 months ago. And all that time I've been thinking about it, and I thought, well, what I'm really talking about is sincerity. It's very difficult. It's very, very difficult. And the reason why I decided this video, because lately I've been feeling my mortality, I am 69 now. I might have another 10 years of darkroom printing left. And even then, I made some 24 by 30 inch prints, but it was really backbreaking because I have these trays and 3 gallons of chemicals, and even though I can do it, I get really tired now. So I think in terms of what am I going to do with my time now? I know I want to play music again, and now that the pandemic's almost over, matter of fact, we're going out and playing for seniors again. That's great. But when I do this, I feel this is oh, by the way, I did post some videos of the work in progress, and what I finally came up with, I did a video, but it's on a separate channel. It's a kind of a private channel, just for my family. So it's on that, but I'll put a link to it if you want to see that, how the final video came out, the final selections of the 48 images. This is one of the last images. This is my grandfather's family. My father's here, and Uncle Bill's the youngest. They were separated because they were in China, and so I ended it. I started with history, and then I went to Chinatown, and I went to family and friends, and I went back to history to end the full. That's how I decided to put it together, and I ended with the actual portrait of my great-grandfather who started it all, which is not photographic. It was painted, but I made a copy and the pictures are authentic feeling. They have a strong sense of authenticity to me. They are sincerely done. One beautiful thing about this is that, I don't know, 1/3 of the photographs I didn't even shoot. Some of obviously done by my father, but some I don't know who. Like, I don't know who shot this. You know, there are pictures in there I don't know who. But that's not the point. It's not about me. It's not about my photography. It's about something else. And because of that, there's a sense of sincerity. The pictures have a lot of lyricism in them. You look at it and you can feel the story behind that one picture, which contributes to the whole story. But even though I feel the sincerity in the photographs that I did from photography by someone else, that it isn't me. I get these, every so often I'll get a letter, email, and people put me on this pedestal or something. They try to make me out to be a hero. And I never was comfortable with that. I try to discourage that. I tell people, well, what I learned, I'll share it with you. Try it. If it works, use it. If it doesn't work, it's okay. But try it, you know. You have to understand, in order for me to share what I know with you, I was very egotistical. When I was young, my father was really, my father was a really good photographer. I'll show you the one in here that, okay, this one here, the Chinatown Gambler. He took first prize in that. When I was a kid, we used to go to the Sigmund Stern, and they would have this photo contest conclusion, and he took first prize for that. Later on, he would say, well, photography concerts are meaningless, you know, look down upon them. But he was really good. So one of the driving forces for me to be good was to be better than he was. And that's another story. It goes back to my relationship with my father, which turned out okay in the end, but when I was young, boy, I gave him a hard time. And after I was better than my father, I had to be better than everyone else, better than any other lab. I mean, I welcomed any evaluation between me and anyone else because I knew masking, and they didn't. So I could always make my print look different, if not better. And that wasn't enough. Then I had to show off my abilities to all these color labs by writing the software with my brothers. And even Kodak couldn't do what we did. That really feeds your ego. So I've been through all that. So you have to separate the person from the work. You know, I'm very uncomfortable when people think I'm something I'm not. I'm just here to explain how I did things so that it's not lost, basically. And I fully know there are people out there dedicated that can produce photographs much better than I can. There already are people doing that. And they're doing it without masking, you know. I don't mask everything, but mostly everything I do is because the local contrast, separating the subject from the local area around it, is what always made me emotionally attached to any photograph I saw in any art show, any gallery. So I do excel in film masking, but I know there are people out there that can take this and run with it. I'm not comfortable when people come to me and make me out to be something I'm not, and that happens pretty often. I'm enough that, and that ego is not dead. Sometimes, like I had George in Romania, great guy. Over 3 years, I've been teaching him, showing him, because he was an expert in digital. He didn't know much about film. Now he's very good at film, deservedly so. But I got pissed off at him when I told him to do something, and he goes off and does something else, and and that's all ego on my part, not his. He's just open, right? He's just trying all these different things, and so I recognize that I'm not, perfect, or even if you just talk about photography, I'm not talking about perfection anywhere. I mean, you talk to my ex-wife and find out how perfect I am, right? Anyway, that's what I want to say. Sincerity can be accomplished here. Hopefully it'll lead to some here, but it doesn't necessarily, okay? It's always a work in progress in that regard. And I guess that's what I want to say. Just wanted to be honest with you guys and not lead you down some false assumption about me, okay? All right, that's it. Thank you.